thing I'm going to do is I am going to log into the test account I just happened to find, and let's go over to the Graffiti Gallery. So in our introduction, I talked about noticing things that are out of place, that don't seem to fit. And this Graffiti Gallery is a great place to use that skill, because here we have quite a few pictures that look like they have some kind of urban skateboardy theme, except a few of them, or I should say 4 of them. So here we have a picture of a black and white photo of an older fellow with a beard. Okay, this seems really out of place in a skateboard shop. And we have a message submitted with this. So this is the kind of thing I was mentioning, that it just doesn't look correct. It doesn't fit. Why is this here? Something worth looking into. Let's go back to the gallery. We also have this, got a picture of Beethoven. Okay, well, that doesn't seem to fit either. And then we have this photo. They just don't seem to fit. And the final one is a picture of a pie. Okay, there's a pie club in Shred. That seems odd, and something. The photo looks a little odd. Something like it's it's a shading on the upper left-hand corner there. It looks a little odd. But sometimes developers will either use cryptography incorrectly to protect sensitive data, or they'll confuse encoding with cryptography. And I remember as a developer not having any background of cryptography. None of my computer science classes mentioned anything about cryptography. So at that point in time, before I was in application security, I didn't know anything about cryptography. And I worked for Department of Defense contractors. Back then, all the cryptography was done with hardware, so I didn't have to learn about it. But in today's world, this is something that most development teams have to have some familiarity with. But it's not a topic that we expect developers ever to be experts in, because that's what your security team is for. So when it comes to choosing an algorithm, developers without a lot of background in encryption may just choose an algorithm randomly and get into trouble when that algorithm is broken. So take a look at the images and see, maybe the developers use some encryption or encoding that isn't really as strong as they were hoping for. Sometimes developers make assumptions. I remember making those assumptions, and sometimes those assumptions are going to be security vulnerabilities. So definitely take a look at the photos and see if anything jumps out at you as odd or out of place. Or shoot, you can even look up the URL address bar. We have a photo ID number. Maybe that is a useful piece of information that can help you find a vulnerability and exploit it. So we always have a few cryptographic challenges in all of our sites, and so Shred is no different. One more location that you might find interesting, if you haven't already noticed it, if you go to the Skateboards, we have a skateboard detail and description that seem a bit odd. Another location where developers may have been protecting some data, or maybe it's from a user who added this item and for some reason don't want anyone to read this in plain text. So something to take a look at and dig into when you're not sure where to go next. So along with cryptography, We also have our I'm going to go back to the Graffiti Gallery, because notice now I have this My Graffiti button since I'm logged into the application, and we're allowed to add a photo. So another one of the security controls that's important is authorization. And typically, anytime any user requests access to sensitive data or sensitive functionality, the application has to check to see if they have permission to do that. And sometimes developers get that incorrect by making the assumption that, oh, I don't have to do that here because of important reasons that aren't correct, or they just skip that step for some reason. And so notice that when you can upload your photos, you can actually keep them private for some reason. So here we have a permission issue. And so you are allowed to upload a photo to your account. You are allowed to make a photo private that's in your account. So from the last Learning Lab, let's abuse those permissions. Can we upload a photo to another user's account? That could be bad. Think if you did that in one of our very popular social media sites, you could really get somebody in trouble if you found a way to do that. Can you view a photo that another user has uploaded and made private? So anytime you see anything that deals with permissions for your account, see if you can abuse that permission in another user's account. If I can add a description to a photo, can I edit a description of a photo in another user's account? All these should be protected with permissions, and maybe some of them are, but you don't know unless you dig in to see how this process works of uploading photos and editing photos. Also, we have a really common piece of functionality here, file upload. And notice how it very nicely requests you to only upload JPEGs and PNGs. Well, allowing users to upload files is really risky functionality, because files can be dangerous in many different ways. And if you're asking me to upload a JPEG or a PNG file, I'm certainly going to be giving you a lot more than that. Files can be malicious based on their file type. Like, it could be an executable file. Files can be dangerous based on their name. The name of a file could be a directory traversal attack. It could be a SQL injection attack if that file name is stored in the database. The content of the file could be dangerous. What if I upload an HTML file, and in that file I have malicious JavaScript, so that when the file is opened, especially if it's opened by a browser, that JavaScript will execute. And then finally, the size of the file could be dangerous. Maybe I'm using a file to perform some kind of denial of service attack. So maybe if I was uploading an XML file, I could try to create that file so that it crashes an XML parser. Or in this case, maybe I just try to upload a huge file so I can potentially use up all the storage that a site has. Although that's a lot harder now than it used to be. So play around with permissions and try to abuse what the application has set for you. So look what the permission is for you, and then try to abuse it for somebody else. And then finally, our last security control that I want to talk about is authentication. So this is commonly first contact with the attacker, is the login page. And so attackers are going to try to find a way around it, especially if they can determine if the authentication framework is custom built instead of one that is well used, well tested, and well known. For example, if this was using Windows authentication or OAuth authentication, it's going to be a lot harder to bypass than if this is an authentication control just custom built by the development team of Shred. Because I'm going to go out on a limb and say the development team that created Shred are not experts in authentication. And also remember that authentication is a lot more than just logging in. Authentication is also the forgot password feature. It is the logging out feature. It's password reset feature. It is, you could also include session management if you wanted to as part of authentication. How are session IDs created? Are they randomly generated and long so they can resist brute force attacks, or are these session IDs static? They don't change. I log in and get a session ID, and then I log out, and then I log back in, I get the same session ID. That's bad. That would definitely be a security vulnerability. So authentication is another control that's definitely going to be tested by attackers. So even though we can log in, you can create your own account, you can log in. Some of you I see have found the test account, but there are other ways to bypass the login feature here. And typically one of them is, can you find an injection vulnerability? A common form of an injection vulnerability is SQL injection. And that's something that can be tested for in the login feature, because typically if there's a SQL database, the developers that wrote this code are taking the username and password as input and adding it to a SQL statement. Now, if they did that insecurely, you could have a SQL injection issue. If they did it securely, maybe they used a parameterized query or a prepared statement where they took the username and password and bound them to parameters so that they would be treated as data, because they are data, then that we wouldn't have a vulnerability here. But you have to test. And I know if you haven't tested for SQL injection before, we do have SQL injection as part of the hacker cheat sheet that I talked about in the introduction. You can find that over on the Command and Control platform under the Hacking 101 menu option in the guide section, or you can just Google it. There's a wonderful security website called OWASP.org. Shout out to you OWASP members who are joining us today. There's a ton of information about SQL injection and lots of other security vulnerabilities at the OWASP.org website. So lots of information there that can be really helpful if you are looking for SQL injection vulnerabilities and how to abuse them or exploit them when you find them. So everyone, so hopefully again I gave you some information that make you think about where else you can look for vulnerabilities in the Shred application. It's a target-rich environment, so if you are having any frustrations, please use the chat feature over on the Command and Control platform. Remember, on the sites page, it's just in the bottom right-hand corner. You can click on that teardrop-shaped icon and ask a question of an instructor, and we're happy to help you out with that. And good luck, everyone. And the instructors will be around for another hour, and so happy to answer any questions that you have.